All right. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and kick off. I got a lot of stuff to cover tonight. Typical Scott Reminder fashion, I scheduled way too much to get done in an hour. So I'm trying to just get right into it. Welcome to the Aftercamp meetup. It's been a hot minute since we've done one of these. It's the first time we haven't done one in a 2-week succession. So thank you for coming back and not forgetting about Aftercamp. For those of you who have not hung out with us before, just really quick, the quick plug, Aftercamp is all about what do you do post-graduation from a boot camp or from a computer science degree or maybe even self-study. Web development is the focus, software engineering is the focus. Quick plug on Rachel and I. I've been in the bootcamp game since the beginning. Where I started my first bootcamp in 2015. I think bootcamp's actually 2014, and bootcamps officially started in 2013. I'm a development and education nerd. I've bopped around the country, started a couple bootcamps. I have 3 under my belt. Currently, the director of software engineering at a agency called Artisan. But basically my history runs education, agency, and enterprise. Anyways, none of that is really that important. Most of you all know that, but just in case somebody catches this YouTube recording. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight is 3 things, and all of them are kind of grouped together to talk about like planning applications. So the big focus tonight is architectural graphs, ERDs, and OpenAPI. And I really want to do something. I want to break down the purpose of all 3, especially when it comes to planning applications, and then technologies surrounding those. And so actually the technology is kind of the interesting part. It makes it visual. It's a lot easier. But as I show you the visual side, the application side, we're going to talk about like why do we do this stuff? Okay, cool. So let me get over to our first application 1 second here. So the very first thing I'm going to start off talking about is architectural graphs. And the reason I'm starting here is basically it's thinking about like planning an application. So let's go ahead and do a screen share. And the setup for this really is just thinking about so like kind of that whole like, so you have an app idea kind of thing, right? Like you have an idea for an app, you want to start building your app. And I think one of the things that I've noticed from myself, and certainly from graduates from various schools, and quick clarification, taught bootcamp for 5 years, taught CS for 5 years. I think you could call me self-taught, although I do have a degree in game design. So it's kind of like indoctrinated into programming through that. But one of the things I noticed about folks is that we have a tendency to think very visually, right? We think about when we have this app idea, what's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? What's it going to be like to experience the application? So if I were to say to you, I want you to build a recipe website, a website that basically shows recipes, has the picture, has the steps. You start thinking about that, and you probably start thinking about it from like how would it look, and you probably go to other recipe websites to see how they look. And that is a fine approach. Certainly front-end visual interactive design is super important. As I've progressed through my career, building apps for clients, as I've talked to other folks who have done the same thing, one of the things that I've noticed that that you start to do as you get deeper in this career path is you really start to think about things as data first or structure first. And so the first 2 things I want to show you tonight, architecture graphs with Lucid charts, and ERDs, or kind of ERD-like things with DBDiagram, is really thinking about not like what you see on the screen, but more like how is the app going to be built, which is what Lucid chart's all about. And then what data do we need to be thinking about, which is what DBDiagram is going to be about, and what ERDs are going to be about. And the reason why this approach is so important is when you start building an app, you have a tendency to think about it in kind of like successive iterations, meaning like, I'm going to start building this app and this is the way it's going to look. This is what the first feature set's going to look like. And then the next feature set is, or the next enhancement I'm going to make is going to be this thing. And you start to scaffold these applications in kind of a layered approach. And as you get deeper in this profession, one of the things that mistakes I've made several times is that when I approach client applications that way, I usually like in software terms, design myself into a corner, and it becomes harder and harder and harder to upgrade because I didn't think about the bigger picture. And so when we started Aftercamp, I was really thinking about like things like, gosh, what is like the advice I wish I had back when I was first starting this, and what are the things I wish I would have known? And certainly like the design of an application or the ecosystem for the application is important, but so is like the data. And so I'm going to start off by talking about the ecosystem, and I want to kind of paint a picture of why this is important. So first off, let's introduce the software or the website that I'm using as a tool, and then we're gonna go ahead and just use it for just a couple of minutes to like just rapidly like whip up like an architecture graph. So first off is this technology called Lucid chart. And so it's lucid.app. It doesn't, I don't think it's, I think it's like $5 or $6 a month. I could be wrong on that, but really cool tool. It's, I mean, essentially it's like PowerPoint. It's on steroids, but it's like built specifically for this purpose of building diagrams. And so they're, you know, and at a high level, you guys have probably seen me actually use this before. Now I'm sitting here thinking about it, but the tool itself is not like a super sophisticated tool. You drag boxes on, and they got text boxes, and they have some pre-programming where you can connect the boxes together. Super exciting. And you can drag the boxes with the line updates. Ooh, so cool. It's not like a super crazy difficult technology to use, but the utility in it is super nice for planning out applications. And I'll get to that in just a second. But the other thing that they have too is they have templates. And so they have kind of pre-constructed templates really focused around software. So the trick here is when you are designing a diagram for an application, which we'll do in just a second, there's not really a right way to do it. I actually see really elaborate architecture graphs, and I see really basic architecture graphs. And I always get the question, like, what makes a good graph? Like, what makes a good architecture graph? And honestly, I'm like, it's just the one that people can understand when they look at it. So if you look at something like this, this is a template that is provided by Lucid Chart. And there we go. And what this is, it's the AWS Atlassian standard infrastructure. And so what this architecture graph is showing is essentially some AWS setup for some anonymous feature within the Atlassian products. And what this is showing is it's saying, hey, we're using AWS. VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. You have to understand some infrastructure, IaaS stuff for that. Don't worry about that. But basically, it's kind of showing how all of these technologies fit together. Now, when I say creating it correctly for the one that you like, creating an architecture graph that you understand, it's really about knowing your audience. And so for me, like having been doing this for a while, like I look at this and I'm like, oh, well, this is probably the audience for this is somebody who's probably both programming and infrastructure, which is like traditional IT network system stuff. And certainly cloud as well too, because I think cloud is kind of the marriage of those two things. So kind of technical. You'd have to know like what autoscaling is. You have to know what ELB is, which is Elastic Beanstalk. You'd have to know quite a bit of these things in order to get this graph. And so if you're looking at this and you're overwhelmed, well, you're probably not the audience, and that's okay. And then I've showed other architecture graphs that were basically just like a front end, client, server, and database. And we looked at some of those, and actually let's dig some of that stuff up. Let's go to my documents. And probably if you've ever been around me, you've probably seen an architecture graph that looks a little bit something like this. So front end, client, server, database, super basic. And really, what's cool about this, and when, I use this every single day at work when working with clients, we use this as a team to help communicate what it is that we're going to build. So typically, when we create architecture graphs, it's really to help create the understanding of like what is the front end going to do, what's the back end going to do, where's the data going to be, who's going to use that data, that sort of thing. So I'm going to set up a very basic example. And I just want to kind of throw out an idea to you. And the idea is this. Let's say we wanted to create a website for a pizzeria. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a site that users could order pizza from. Then those orders would go up to a database. And then we wanted to create a separate application that also was meant for the restaurants, where they could actually get the order data from that database and create, make the order. So they get the information in, they can make the pizza, and then they can say, cool, it's done, go deliver it. And then maybe a third application for the drivers to basically know when they're done with their deliveries. So what we have is we have 3 separate apps. And the level of fidelity of this graph is going to, this architecture graph is going to be relatively lo-fi, but you'll get kind of the idea as we go here. So the goal is talk about how we're going to set these applications up. And once again, it's not about complexity. It's really just about, like, can you understand what is being built? So let's do this. So we're going to go ahead and start with that the order website. So we might have something where we have the front end, and this would be like your HTML, CSS. We have the client application, and this would be like your React or your Angular or your JavaScript client application. And then let's go ahead and create a server that talks to this application. So we're going to call this like this could be like an API gateway, but we'll go ahead and just call this generally server. And let's actually call this customer API server. And then maybe that connects to a database. So then we connect to that, or like so. Now the other thing here is that maybe we want to separate the, come on. We want to separate, oh my gosh, there we go. What's in the cloud versus what is on the user's computer. So maybe we just throw a little cloud here to like signify that, sorry, my computer is doing wonky stuff. My internet is crazy. There we go. That somehow this goes from the front end experience to the back end experience. Now at the end here, what's happening is we'll go ahead and call this orders database. There we go, orders data. Oh my gosh, orders database. There we go. So when the customer orders a pizza, they do it from the front end, goes to the client applications, communicates to the API server. API server then maybe this probably has a couple other steps, but goes into the order database. Now that order database basically houses the order that was just made by the customer. So now what we want to do is we want to kind of create that same idea for the restaurant. And so this would probably be, sorry, my Lucid chart is running slow tonight. Maybe we have as like a very similar experience kind of for the restaurant. So this would be something like the pizzeria front end. And then it's also storming. So sorry if it gets really loud and you see flashes of light. It is literally lightning right outside my house. It's very ominous. Can anyone hear it? No? All right, that's pizzeria.
We heard a bit of a boom in the background there.
Right on. It's very violent out there right now. All right. It's also not as snappy as it normally is. So I don't know if that's because I'm streaming and doing this. All right. So this would be the pizzeria API server as well too. Same deal, connects to the client side, connects to the server side. But here's the trick, right? So then basically what we're showing here is that we're going to maybe pull from the same database. Once again, we're kind of going to separate our front end and back end here with a little cloud graphic. But the point here is what I'm showing you now, or hopefully like the revelation is now, is that, hey, these two applications pull from the same database. And, you know, in our conversations about the architecture of this thing, we might actually say, gosh, you know what? Let's go ahead and separate some piece of technology where we're going to go ahead and create a service to help separate the two, basically, so we're not writing custom logic to write orders, update orders, delete orders. And maybe what we want to do is we want to create another service to actually act as an intermediary between those two applications. So we could go ahead and break this apart and say, well, now this is the order service. And the two applications, one for the pizzeria and one for the customers, actually talk to that order service. And the order service is actually the thing that talks to the database. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that maybe what this would be is that instead of having two separate Node applications or Python applications, maybe we have three, right? We actually have a third one that's broken apart that way. If I need to update the logic to write to orders, I'm not updating in two places, I'm updating in one. But here's the kind of what's cool about these architecture graphs is that, you know, these get bigger as you work on bigger applications, and certainly could be more intricate. But what's cool is if I go back to my team and say, hey, you know what, team, we noticed that as we were updating logic for the pizzeria API server, gosh, we're gonna have to go back and rewrite the order services for the customer API server as well too. And rather than do that, we're just gonna go ahead and create an order service as a third server, essentially, or microservice, and that'll talk to the database. That way we don't need to like update our logic all over the place. So the key point here is that architecture graphs just like enable conversation, and it really helps kind of just like heighten. And actually, I've actually already used these in Aftercamp meetups as well too. In fact, I think we were doing some crazy stuff at one point where I was like, hey, here's like 5 different Node applications talking to each other. And the point there wasn't that the application was intelligent, but I was explaining that, gosh, our front end is talking to, can go through and communicate from server to server to eventually get to this database. The other way that we kind of did this too, let me go to my documents. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think we did a little demonstration where we're talking about AWS services, and we were talking about how the browser and React application were talking to the S3 bucket, and that browser application was talking to Elastic Beanstalk application. And we were talking about basically kind of just using these graphics to help explain kind of how these applications are actually built. So the kind of the core takeaway of Lucid charts in architecture graphs is as you start working with teams of people working on applications that have front ends, back ends, services, databases, all these different things, it can be really unclear about what you mean when you're like leading the team or you're trying to communicate effectively on the team. And so I think every time there's been an architecture graph, whether it be on a whiteboard, a piece of paper, a PowerPoint, whatever, they've always made the conversation go a lot easier between me and the other devs. And so Lucid Chart just seems to be the kind of an application that I see a lot of development teams use. And one of the things I would encourage would be is if you're working on an application is to just like, don't even need Lucid Chart, just grab a piece of paper and think about the different parts of the application, and don't worry about getting it right. That's not really the point. The point is sketching out kind of how does stuff happen in your application? Like, where are your front ends? Where are your servers and services? What are your databases? And maybe you can break these things apart as well too. And I certainly think front end and client has got its own crazy architectures now too. And so if you think about something like the flux pattern versus the redux pattern, I know I've used front end architecture graphs to help explain kind of the differences between the two and the nuances between the two, so that developers who are maybe picking up Flux for the first time can kind of understand better what the difference between that and the Redux pattern are. So Lucid Chart's great for it, but the core thing here is I think is just getting used to talking about it, or getting used to doing it. I'm gonna pause for a minute for questions. I'm trying to watch the clock and make sure I'm doing about 20 minutes each of these, but questions about Lucid or architecture graphs as a whole?
I'm not entirely sure why you would have 3 separate applications to handle these orders. I mean, yes, that you would have the the front end application, but I'm not sure why you would have the pizzeria application.
I'm fictional scenario, but I would just say like if you have a website, a consumer website, so you go to pizzahut.com. Let's just I don't want to do it. You go to pizzahut.com and you order pizzahut.com. Now this application is going to be super pretty, right? This is the one that the users are using, and we want to make sure that like we are on full display here. But when I order a pizza, right, it like I say, hey, I want it delivered to my house. That actually has to get filtered off to the correct restaurant, right? Because I say, hey, I want a delivery. there's some service or server, right, that's going to figure out what geographically consolidate and say, hey, you're in Kansas City, Missouri. Let me find the closest Pizza Hut to you. And what it does is it says, okay, you ordered a pizza, you're in Kansas City, let's go give it to that restaurant. So it throws it into some database. Now on Pizza Hut side, so like the people who are actually working on the restaurant, they need to receive that order that came from the internet, right? And so they are getting some data coming down to their restaurant through some application that says, Scott just ordered a pizza, go make the pizza, right? Follow me so far?
Yeah.
Cool. So whether that be web app, whether that be some sort of like hardware terminal setup or whatever, could be even like a mobile app, they have some sort of different application that they see, but they merge at the data at some point, right? Because we know that my order that I put in through this website got to them, right? And that they are making the pizza. And then when they're done making the pizza, they're gonna have to say, because you get the cool little chart now, it says, hey, your pizza's cooking. Hey, your pizza, Tom is delivering your pizza. There's something that says there's different statuses of that pizza. So something in the system or some system has been created to update the status of what's going on with your pizza. Now, if you do DoorDash, right, you can actually see the freaking driver. You can see the driver, who's driving your order to you, which means they probably have some other application that literally is geographically tracking where that driver is, some sort of GPS navigation. So that might actually be a third app that says, once again, kind of, it's going back to that core website where the experience that I started from, but something is updating, that data is getting back to me. And I think understanding the intricacies of all of that is where architecture graphs would be really good. Of like what service does what. Is that better?
Actually, that makes plenty of sense.
Yeah. But that's what's cool about software, right? Is like, you can do all this crazy stuff. You can separate all these different applications that talk to each other, but keeping track of it, especially when you're the lead dev and trying to get everybody to all the herding cats, all the cats to move together in the same directions can be really tricky. So getting everyone to understand is where I think these tools really, really help out.
I have just a quick comment.
Yeah.
I'm a bootcamp grad that ended up in software QA. And I have used, in a very basic way, Lucid chart just to understand how some call chains are working so that I can see where the functionality is, and also what my tests need to be asserting to make them the most efficient and high value as possible. Because if I can see it laid out, it's really helped me just to know, okay, this is the information that's kind of the crux of what my front end app is expecting in this flow or whatever. So
that's awesome. That's a super good point. And I'm gonna dovetail off of that too. I think big spoiler for everybody here. If you get into learning sciences at all, the science of learning, first off, the learning styles are made up. Those are not a real thing. They don't actually exist. In fact, I still have somewhere here the Psychology Today article that talks about how crap the learning styles are. So then we talk about what's in place of that. And one of the things you learn is that humans are just visual learners. And so to communicate a very technical concept, something like a call chain could be so much better. You can get everyone on the same literal page if you just sketch it out and draw it out. So that's such a great contribution. Thank you for that. Yeah, be really clear. Lucid chart, not just architectural graphs. That is not the limit of that. It's literally a set of tools that I see as an architect. I see lots of architecture graphs created through it, but you can create, database table schemas. You can create call chains. You can create whatever you guys want. And actually, what is cool, I think you can get a free trial. There is a ton of templates built into here. So you can kind of see here flowcharts, similarly diagrams for delivery management, cloud architecture, system diagrams. There's all sorts of stuff in here. User personas, daily stand-ups. I would argue that the templates are actually part of the power of this. So you just have all this stuff figured out. You can kind of start using it. Okay, I'm gonna switch over to the next one. I want to talk about DBDiagram.io and ERDs. So really quick, what is an ERD? If you actually just Google ERD, we're gonna get some graphics here. And an ERD stands for Entity Relationship Diagram. And what we're talking about here is mostly how relational data, so like SQL, how all the tables fit together. So if you look at this graphic, basically what this is showing here is some sort of relationship between tables. It looks like this is probably for some sort of like library application or book warehouse sort of thing. So here we'd have, here's a book, here's the author of the book, here's the publisher of the book, and so on and so on. It looks like we got a shopping basket, customers, books, warehouse, all that stuff. So basically what this is showing here is at the high level first is these tables, how they all fit together. I'll also note too that the arrows have special significance. So different types of arrows mean different things. So things like many to many, one to one, one to many, those sort of relationships and how those tables work together. Now, the other thing that you're going to see here too is you have the specific properties, and then you have usually have the type assignment as well too. So here we can see that a customer has a name that is a varchar 255. Now, I was doing some research ahead of this talk just to be like, okay, do I write ERDs weird or do other people write ERDs weird? And largely just like architecture graphs, I think ERDs actually have a lot of nuance as well too, depending on who creates them. So some ERDs, I was looking at a LinkedIn Learning class on ERDs. They don't actually show the data type, which I thought was kind of crazy. So like in that course, they're teaching you ERDs, and then basically they're saying that the properties don't have a type assignment, which I thought was kind of weird. I want to show you a tool that I really get down on. I love this tool so much. It's called DBDiagram.io. And it is a tool that's got a little code to it. They got kind of their own little like syntax here. And what this does is it creates essentially an ERD that shows things like table relationships and also has type assignments. But what's great about this tool is that you can just start sketching out how like data would fit together. And then you can export it to your syntax of choice. So I can actually export this to MySQL, Postgres server, or you can just export it as a graphic as well too. So what's cool is you can start working on a data like your data model, how everything's going to work together, and actually just take out the Postgres file and like actually dump it into like a Postgres client. Like I use Postico, and you can kind of start your data process through that. Now, I would argue that this is the biggest change in my personal workflow in the past 10 years, is that before I even start an architecture graph, I think about data first. In fact, the company I work for right now called named Artisan, it was one of like the most happiest serendipitous things ever, is that in their interview process for software engineers, the final interview is actually talking about a data model and creating an ERD. Has nothing to do with code. It's really just how you think about how an application comes together. And I love that because this is an application that I actually have not started building. And I was just roughly sketching out how data fits together. So what's cool here is that you can just basically say something like, I want to create a table. So let's actually just go ahead and create a table. We'll go ahead and just call this, let's say table Aftercamp demo, and we're going to do open and close curly brackets. And can I get that? Yeah, I can get that up a little bit. And we'll say ID int, and then we do the PK for primary key. And then we'll just do something like name, and then we'll say varchar. Boop. All right, where to go? Now I got to find the table. There it is. So I have a little table here, and let's zoom back in. And as I add on to this, we'll just say something like hex key. We'll call this an int. I'm just using a small sample. We can add on the properties and build out the table. And then let's just go crazy and say something like, oh, well, let's say this hex key is going to fit into the goal ID over here. Well, I can do a click and drag, and basically what I can do is I can establish a relationship. And so here it creates a reference to, hey, the Aftercamp demo.hexkey property maps to the goal ID. So what's cool is it's got a little bit of visual element to it, and then it goes ahead and creates the code for you. Just deleted that reference, and then I could go back up and change the table as well too. Friends, I love this application. I don't know why, but I still haven't paid for it, but I should. Rachel's probably gonna kill me now. She makes me pay for all my applications, but I paid for Lucid Chart. I should pay for this one. But this tool has definitely gotten significantly better over the years. And I got to tell you, this little export feature is awesome. Now, what's cool about this is that, like, for me, like the visualization of data was like a game changer for me, because I was thinking about my applications, and I'd start in something like, a node server, and kind of start sketching out APIs, and then going back into like the database and actually creating like the tables. And it was a really weird workflow. And what's cool is that if you're doing architecture graphs and you're doing these ERDs, these entity relationship diagrams, like we haven't coded yet, but when we get to the part where we do code, it makes it so much more clear about what it is I'm actually programming. So let's say something like, I'm going to delete this Aftercamp demo one. So this was basically a habit tracking site. I was kind of just sketching out an idea for, if a user was working on a project, kind of like a commit, sort of like the GitHub, and what would a commit need to have? Well, it need to have something like created at, like when there was the commit made, who is the user, and what was the project they were actually making a commit to. And what's cool is that if I wanted to, I'd just be like, oh, well, I need to create an endpoint for commits, and like what would I need to do to make sure that we have an API set up for commits. And I'll get to Swagger doc in here in just a second. But what was nice is that this gave me an ability to kind of like not think about the application, but think about the data first. And then that data really drives the application, the direction the application needs to go. And I would say that this way of thinking like really helped me kind of like untangle the mess of ideas that I hadn't said. And this looks like a tangled mess. I get that. There's irony in that. But the point here is that it allows me to sketch things before I ever get to the point where I actually start writing code. I have a much better idea of how this thing is going to live and how it's going to take shape before I ever actually like write any code. And that was a big game changer for me. I really like thinking this way. It definitely organizes thoughts. Ranted again there for a bit. Let me pause. Questions or things y'all want to talk about on DBDiagram?
I think it's really cool how you have the ability to programmatically make that connection and it showed up visually. Can you do the inverse?
Like program it?
Can you draw an arrow from one table to another, and then that will update the code? Is that a feature available?
Yeah. Sorry. To be clear, so let's check this out down here. So line 133, if I were to do something like, I don't know, let's go crazy, and I'm just gonna be like, boop. So that adds the reference down below.
Nice.
Yep.
So then as soon as you export that in like say PostgreSQL, that's the whole database table, all that's gonna be set up for you.
Yeah, it's an SQL file. So very much like, let's open this. I trust the authors. So here it's exported to Postgres. Now, I personally don't like these alter tables, so the code's a little wonky. There's some like syntax, much like any other code generator. And so typically what I'll do is I'll go back and add in the refs in, for Postgres, I'll add the individual refs into these table creations themselves. But that's a preference. So, but yeah, the SQL is just ready to go there. And if you create an account with them, you can save too. So if I refresh, the tables are hashed, so it's all saved to you and your user. So you can come back to it at any point, and it's just waiting for you. Dark mode, which is totally worth it. You have to share on the internet, so I think you have to share through Twitter or Facebook. But I love me some dark mode. If you're wondering how I got that. Other questions, comments, concerns, disbeliefs?
I was just gonna say that when we worked on our projects at Prime, this was pretty invaluable tool right here.
Yeah.
It makes all the difference in figuring out how your data is supposed to go and kind of figuring out mistakes before you've actually written all your code out already. So it just brings back memories looking at that.
Yep.
Yeah. What's your theme in VS Code?
Oh, right on. I could do a whole video on this. I feel like I should. I probably feel like I should. So this is Synthwave 84. I'll make sure to send it out. So there's a little trick to it though. You have to install it, and then there's also you have to enable the glow because the glow is not enabled by default, but it's got this really nice little like hum to it. I don't know, just pops for me. It's also nice for teaching people code too, because I feel like the contrast is really nice. It also matches your background, Michael. So I feel like this is you, man.
Man, I was wondering where you get the glow
Yeah.
from, because I never get the glow. I'm like, how come I don't get the glow like Scott does?
yeah. I just
Okay.
got to do on a Mac Command Shift P to get the command palette, and then you have to do enable neon dreams.
Okay. Man, all this time.
Yeah, all this time. Hit me up later. I'll make sure. I'll make sure you got it. Every time I set up a computer, it's like the very first VSC plugin I put in or extension. Okay, I want to make sure I have enough time to get to this last one and leave it open for questions. I will definitely say this is the star of the night. This tool, not DBDiagram, this one I'm about to show, is way bigger than a 20-minute conversation. It is Swagger. And there's a lot to talk about here. So I'm going to try to slow burn it because there is a lot here. So you probably have heard of Swagger. And Swagger has definitely changed over the years. So one of the biggest changes, of course, was that it was acquired by a company called SmartBear. And what Swagger is at a high level, the way that people understand Swagger, as a way to document APIs. It does so much more than that. And there's actually a set of tools that really make up Swagger. So what do I mean when I say document APIs? Let's actually just pull up an example here and we'll kind of work backwards. So I just want to show you a preview what all this looks like first, then we'll kind of get, we'll move backwards here. So what you're looking at here is an example of a set of endpoints for a fictional pet store called the Swagger Pet Store. And so what this is showing is essentially all of the endpoints for what a fictional server that says, well, here's how you post a pet, here's how you put a pet, get pet, delete a pet, and then the same thing for a store and an individual user and so on. And so not only is it documenting the endpoints, but it also gives you information about those endpoints and the way that the data should be structured. So let's look at something like here we are uploading an image. So here it's basically saying, hey, we're gonna, on the post route, we're going to whack pet, whack ID, whack upload image. And so we're uploading an image for an individual pet. And you can see here that it accepts some metadata, accepts the file, it accepts, of course, the pet ID as well too. And then it tells me what I'm going to get as a response as well too. So here we're expecting to see a code 200. So what this is, you can kind of think about it as a way to document the way that your API should be structured. That's part of Swagger. Swagger itself is also a tool. So look at that here in just a second. And then there's this other overarching concept of OpenAPI. So when Swagger started out, it started out with something called like Swagger Docs. It was almost like a communication standard for, or like a documentation standard for, here's the way we should document our APIs. And of course, the big piece of this, of why this is so important, is if we go back to our little pizza example here from earlier, we talked about this fictional example where we're going to go out and build two front ends, two server-side APIs, and maybe like controllers and stuff like that. We have this order service. We need some way where the front-end developers know what APIs to call. We know what API endpoints the back-end developers need to make. There is let's say like this team is 30 developers split across essentially what's equal to what looks like maybe five applications, 2 in the front, maybe 3 in the back. We have a big team of developers working on this, and we all need to be in lockstep about what those endpoints are going to look like, right? Because the front end, we can't wait for the back end team to wrap up all of the endpoints before the front end team starts to actually call those endpoints. And so Swagger really it's like steps in and does this awesome job of having this standard way to say, here's the way that we're going to create our documentation for these endpoints so that everyone is on the same page. Really funny aside. is that not documenting your endpoints can get you in, can end up costing you a ton of money as a development shop. So I won't get into the specifics, but I'm aware of an engagement right now that a team is working with another team where the original team never documented their endpoints. So the second team is trying to come in and support the original team, but they can't because they like don't necessarily understand like how their backend is written. They have to go through the code, the backend code, to figure out what endpoints they should be calling on the front end. So the front end developers have to go to the backend code to figure out what to write. And it's kind of impossible in some cases because there actually is a microservice architecture too, so you have to follow these chains. And so not the cost, so to speak, of not documenting your endpoints can be disastrous after those endpoints are created. But the best documentation, of course, is the documentation that's created up front. So we talked about architecture diagrams. We talked about ERDs and creating database schemas and all those things. This is kind of this like the other step of saying, well, we know what tables we need, but what endpoints do we need to create to support those tables as well too, or those database tables. So what data do I want to expose and make available? And then really that's what this is all about, is a way to say, these are the endpoints we're going to create. And what would be cool is I could hand this to somebody and say, hey, you know what? I want you to go create a get endpoint for pets that basically says, gives the user the ability, or the API caller the ability to find a pet by status. And if I were to hand this to you and say, hey, here's the 3 available statuses, and this is what it should return, here's the data structure it should return, you as a developer would be like, oh, like, I have a good idea of what I'm going to create. I know exactly like what the input's going to be and what the output is going to be. And so Swagger Docs, Swagger UI, this open API documentation style is essentially this consolidation of a great way to document endpoints. So backing up a little bit and kind of going back to the very high level of Swagger, you're going to see that on the website, there's actually, there's all these different components. So the first is this open API specification or OAS. And what this is essentially, it's a way to document RESTful APIs. Really quick aside on this too. This is just like, I don't want to call it a pet peeve, but just definitely something I want to make you all aware of because I see it on a lot of resumes. A RESTful API, a lot of people actually don't know exactly what that means. And so I'm going to oversimplify this, but I find a lot of people when they talk about REST, they're talking about get, post, put, delete. A get, post, put, delete is not a REST API. REST API is actually got these 7 architectural standards. It's very pompous. It's like anything else in development. It's like a set of standards. But basically, understanding what the REST API is a fun research topic. It should just take you 30 minutes to read it. Probably I'm 10 years and counting to understand it. But in a nutshell, like REST is an architectural paradigm for endpoints on servers. I don't know. Anyways, so my point here is this, is that when Swagger says, hey, it's the world standard for RESTful APIs, part of the REST API like specification, architectural specification, is that it's really freaking well documented and that it's easy, it's intuitive, so to speak. So this is actually a very powerful statement when it says it's the world standard for RESTful APIs. So it's on its 3rd iteration. You can read all about it. I'm not going to bore you with the details of all of this right now, but basically it says this is the way that you should document your endpoints and you should document your API. So there's getting started section. There's, of course, you can learn about OpenAPI. You can generate your own definitions. But rather than just say, go read it, I'll show you kind of an example of what it looks like when it's done. So let's go explore Swagger tools. You can create a free account. And Swagger, so OpenAPI is the standard for documenting it. Swagger is now basically the tools to create that documentation. So a couple of things here, Swagger Editor, Swagger UI, and Swagger CodeGen. Let's go over to Editor. Let's check out a live demo. So we looked at the pet store before. I was trying to whip up a pizzeria example here and not going fast enough, so I abandoned it. But essentially, let's take a look at just let's go to user here. So this is like the same, or mirrors the same of what we're seeing on over on the original site. So here we had post, user, create wish list. And this is what the documentation looks like. What this is over here is we basically code that visual aesthetic, and we do that using a YAML file. And so it's pretty easy to pick up. I mean, relatively easy compared to the rest of programming. Probably take you a hot minute, but it's pretty, I don't want to say intuitive. I'm just trying to find, here we go, user, create with list. So here it's basically saying, hey, here's the endpoint, user, create with list. And now we have the, what kind of endpoint is it? It's a post. It gets associated with a tag, which is right here. Summary, description, operation ID. Let's see, create with list, there we go. And so we get this basically pretty easy way to like organize and document it using the YAML file. And it'll format it and kind of arrange everything and the rest. And so it probably is like a good afternoon to a couple day read to understand how to document in this way. But using the toolkit that Swagger gives you, it does lay it out really nicely. And actually, I like that they give you a working example too, because it just allows you to really hop right into it and start making changes. So yeah. Oh, I don't want to berate that point too much. There also is a opportunity to download that onto your computer. So I did download this earlier. And I have it running, I believe, already on 8080. Yeah, okay, cool. Move that. We'll go localhost and 8080 /docs. And so there is like a couple different downloadable versions. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There is the ability to run the server that runs this, the documentation. And then there is kind of this final step or something that Swagger does that is a little mind-blowing and it's a little clunky in my opinion, but there's also this code generator, Swagger code gen. And I'm gonna show this to you. I won't actually like too crazy excited, but basically here we have these endpoints. One of the things that we can do is we can actually generate a server that has those endpoints wired. And so if we were to go ahead and let's say just download, I think I downloaded a Node.js server. It essentially downloads a server you can run, which is what I'm running right now, that has all the controllers and API or controllers and services set up. So here is the pet service, and these are just like stubs, because what you're going to see here is that it exports a function called delete pet. It would take in whatever you told it to take in. Sets up a promise, and so you'd actually have to wire up the database pieces yourself. But the idea behind it is that it would be kind of like a kickstart to the server that you're going to create, which, like I said, I still think it's kind of clunky, but it is kind of cool. You'll notice too that for those of you who've worked with JavaScript, this doesn't say Express; it is like raw Node.js. But I find myself running into way more use cases or way more teams using Swagger, and I'll tell you that the teams that do use it, the lead developers, the architects that do use this, those projects run so smoothly. It's like night and day on the teams that use Swagger versus not using Swagger. In fact, I'm seeing more and more development shops when they look for backend developers that know how to write Swagger. And it's such an easy, quick grab. It's something, like I said, I feel like you could learn like a day or two to kind of get the hang of it. But the point is that if you get in the habit of like, once again, you're planning your application, thinking about your application, writing backend documentation ahead of time, and then obviously letting it update through the course of the project, those just become really powerful communication tools. Because if you're sitting, I'm just making a fictional scenario here. Let's say you're sitting in an interview for a backend developer and you're like trying to get your first backend developer job. You pull out an architecture graph of the application you build, you pull out an ERD, and you pull out Swagger documentation. Like, you and I are gonna have a real serious conversation, not about you being a junior, but more you being like a mid, because that would be behavior I'd expect to see out of a mid rather than By the way, I hate the word junior. The industry uses that. I prefer associate. But to me, the backend developers or the architects that get in the habit of using these tools, it shows me that they're thinking about more than just like building a server or a service. They're thinking about more than building an app. They're looking at building a system and how does that system work together. And the other thing, of course, that I really want to land tonight is that documentation as a whole really elevates the conversations between developers, because what documentation says is it's not just me working on this, but other developers working on it as well too. And I'm trying to create artifacts that help enable us to have a more expedited conversation. It's gonna be a lot easier for you and I to talk about the app with a Swagger documentation about the user, about all the routes and endpoints we need to create. If I come to you and say, hey, James is on my screen right now, so let me use James. Hey, James, you and I are gonna work on this, man. And over the course of the next 2 days, we're going to crank through these post endpoints. You know, are you cool with that? Do you understand what to do? Hopefully James would be like, kind of click through and be like, maybe ask a few questions for something he doesn't understand. But generally, like, this just like expedites the whole conversation. Like, hey, dude, I need you to create a post endpoint for creating with users with an array. It's pretty straightforward. Like, to be clear, there's just no way to do Swagger justice in 20 minutes, but it is such an incredible tool that I have not seen every team use, but I feel like it's definitely gaining steam, and it deserves some of your attention as you are, like, if you bring it to your team and you like get good at it, like that is like that's awesome. Like people are praise you for it, but you know, you want to try to get on teams that are at this level of documentation for sure. All right, I'm gonna shut up, let you guys ask questions, talk about this. Comments, concerns, disbeliefs, those kinds of things. Yeah, I'm gonna go through the chat log quick too.
I'm curious about, so I've been on a team that was using Swagger Docs and then moved away from it to use Postman, which has some similar features and is also different. And one of the big things, so if you open one of those, like that post request you were showing us with the try it button, how much is required for a developer to like hook that up and make that functional? Because that seemed to be kind of one of the sticking points for my team, was like that Postman had that Swagger didn't.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the Swagger is just the documentation, and like I said, the
Right.
generator is not super, like, I don't personally like it, but I guess, you know, I actually used Postman's earlier and I haven't used it recently, so I certainly can't speak to it. And you can see it down here. Like I do use it quite a bit, but I've not used it for that specifically. But I don't know. I think it's, you know, it could be just a preference thing. But no, you just prompted me to go take a closer look at it because I'd love to see where they're currently at with it.
Yeah, cool.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the direct answer to your question is, I would never take this like an auto generate button out of Swagger. I'd go write it myself. Right on. Yeah, Postman is a tool that could easily fit into tonight's conversation, and I think at some point doing an automated QA talk would be a great talk to do. And I probably should get somebody who's extremely well versed in it to come in and chat about it. But QA is elevated. Automated QA is just becoming its own entity and its own beast. And I think embedded automated QA teams, I like just obsessed with how great they are. Cannot say good enough things about them.
Yeah, this is super cool. And in my experience, I've seen folks shift from Postman and Swagger and RESTful APIs to GraphQL for much of the same benefits. What are your thoughts on that? And are you seeing that same trend?
Yeah, you know, I think this fits into another bigger conversation too about gRPC, certainly GraphQL. I think RPC in general. Really quick RPC primer. REST versus the conversation is REST versus RPC, and RPC is just another way to. If REST is a way to talk about endpoints, it's really thinking about things in terms of resources. RPC is a way to talk about endpoints in terms of actions. And so where RPC gets a lot of traction is when you think about really more service-based things, meaning like, hey, server, go do this thing for me. So it's more like it can be like embedded systems, like you can think about actual hardware. So more than just data, but like take actions. And so I think that while Swagger is picking up a lot of steam in the REST community, it does leave out things like GraphQL and RPC, or gRPC is like the kind of the more like the toolbox for RPC. But so I definitely see an uptick in GraphQL. I definitely see an uptick in RPC. And I think, like gRPC is a really interesting conversation. And one of my colleagues was asking me like, hey, as a company, should we be talking about gRPC as a unit? And I'm like, here's the deal, is that I think any of these would I consider to be more advanced, maybe generation 3 or 4 technologies, things like GraphQL, RPC, et cetera. Your team is only as strong as the weakest players in it. And I don't mean that to be like mean or condescending, but seriously, like, I don't want to leave a person on my team behind because we want to go after some particular method or architectural approach. And it's my responsibility as a team lead to make sure that I'm elevating my team. And if I bring somebody else on to the team, I'm not saying something silly like, oh, well, as a junior developer, you should have RPC and GraphQL and all these other things. But instead look for, gosh, this person is really good at, maybe they do come on a Swagger documentation. Like they get the importance of being able to have a conversation or elevate the conversation. So we'll train them up. And so I'm not sure if I'm scratching the itch of your question, Michael, but I think that overall, technology itself, like the community, is becoming very rich because there are so many people entering it. And this is why I love bootcamp so much, and why I love even like Aftercamp is like, it's the whole idea behind it is let's bring more ideas and different people and different approaches to the table, because it's going to elevate all sorts of technologies tenfold. Did I even get close to like approaching your question, Michael? Or what was the original one? I think I got lost in there somewhere.
It's all right. We made it to the green.
Yeah. I think I just overall, I really, Swagger is a tool. I don't think it's the like the end all tool. Postman is a tool. But in the end, I think choosing tools and choosing technologies that are inclusive to people, like in being able to like communicate your ideas and do it not as a way of like asserting authority, but saying like, hey, what do you think? Because it's really hard to communicate that crazy idea that's up in your head. But if I bring you something I can show you and say, hey, can I get your feedback? Hey, can I get, you're like, hey, this is a game plan. What do you think? I think it just expedites things. And then, you have something you can attack. It's like okay, Scott, you want to post a user, but I prefer the pluralization users. Well, that would be just like a way expedited conversation. I did it before I even wrote code. Great. It's just a way to approach collaboration. Rant. What were those 3 pieces of documentation? All backends. Oh, I was just saying architectural graphs, which is where we kind of started out. I think once again, not that to get that crazy. My mind would be blown. And I'm not saying you guys need to do this, but I'm saying it'd be cool. Is that like as a person who interviews, if you had a GitHub repo that had an architecture graph of how your application's laid out, just a small picture, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. If you had an ERD, just an entity relationship diagram laid out somewhere in there, and you had Swagger docs, I would go crazy. Like that would be incredible to see. And once again, I think that in the long run too, it's even not about getting it 100% right, but just having it. It's a question of collaboration and communicating ideas. I think a lot of times we're super nervous about exposing ourselves and exposing our ideas because we're afraid we're going to get it wrong. I will tell you, I get it wrong very much all the time. But I know I got it wrong because I put it down on paper somewhere and somebody told me I got it wrong. And when I got it wrong, then I go get it right. And then I'm better the next time. I think just the more you put yourself out there, the better it's going to go. So don't worry too much about getting it wrong. Just get it up there. If you need feedback, hit me up. Like I'm busy, but I'm not that busy.
Hey, Scott, can I ask for feedback on a portfolio?
Yeah, send it over, man.
Bet.
I'll record it. That offer is still good. If you ever want me, and this goes to everyone, if you want me to look at anything, just let me know. you can hit us up on Slack if Rachel's still listening. Yeah, for sure. Hit us up on Slack. We'll definitely. And actually, I would encourage you to make it public. Put it out there for everybody. The power of community. My response is not the end all be all. Thank you, Michael. Hey, that's top of the hour. I will hang out for a couple more minutes for questions. You guys have been amazing. This time goes by really quick. When we come back, so really quick before you go, Michael is actually guest speaking next time, a couple weeks. Yeah, someone other than Scott. Yeah. So we're super stoked to have him. I'll get that on the website here either today or tomorrow. And then the next one in a month, we are doing Docker and Kubernetes and what you should know about that. Now, really quick, Docker and Kubernetes, I'm just gonna do a quick spoiler, is part of the cloud engineer function. And I personally don't believe that software engineers need to know that. So don't freak out. It's not like a need to know, like here's I'm gonna teach you everything you need to know. But it is a very nice to know. If you know how that fits into the grander scheme of web development, you're going to be better off. So we're going to talk about what you need to know for Docker and Kubernetes in a month. But next time, Michael's going to talk to us more about AWS and going completely serverless with AWS. So any other plug you want to do there, Michael?
Oh, it's going to be exciting. I'm actually going to tweak it based off tonight's talk. I'm going to incorporate an ERD and an architecture diagram. And we're going to show you how to publish this all within an hour. And we're going to get a full stack application going up for you pretty quickly. I think you all love it.
Love it. Sweet. All right, friends. Talk to you soon. See you on Slack. Thanks for coming tonight. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.